The Walker family had always cherished their Sundays. The day began with a heartfelt church service, followed by quiet family time. Sarah Walker, her husband Ethan, and their energetic 8-year-old son Jake were the kind of family that found joy in the simple things: a sunny afternoon at the park, an ice cream cone dripping in the heat, or a shared laugh at the dinner table. That particular Sunday started just like any other. After the service, Ethan had offered to pick up lunch for everyone and left in his car ahead of Sarah and Jake. The two followed closely behind, Jake chattering about his Sunday school lesson, his eyes wide with excitement as he recounted the story of Jonah and the whale. Sarah smiled as she drove, stealing glances at her son's beaming face in the rearview mirror. The road ahead was calm, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow over the trees. Sarah's mind wandered to the plans they had for the evening. Maybe a movie or a board game? Life felt blissfully ordinary until it wasn't. In an instant, the peaceful afternoon shattered. A wailing ambulance, its lights flashing but siren silent, barreled out of control down the opposite lane. Sarah's eyes darted to the rear of Ethan's car, just a few yards ahead. Panic set in as the ambulance swerved erratically, heading straight toward them. "Ethan, watch out," she screamed, her voice drowned by the screeching of tires, but it was too late. The ambulance collided with Ethan's car first, the impact spinning his vehicle into the guardrail. Before Sarah could react, the massive vehicle slammed head-on into hers, crumpling it like paper. Glass exploded. Metal shrieked. Jake's scream was the last thing Sarah heard before everything went black. When she came to, faint voices surrounded her. Strangers pulling over, calling for help, their words tinged with urgency. "T, here is a child in the back," someone yelled. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. Jake was pinned in the back seat, motionless. "No pulse," a medic muttered grimly. Sarah tried to reach for her son, but darkness swallowed her again. For Jake Walker, the chaos of the accident faded as quickly as it began. One moment, he was in the back seat of the car, his world spinning and shattering in a blur of noise and light. The next, everything was still eerily quiet. Jake opened his eyes to find himself standing in a place unlike anything he had ever seen. The air was warm, carrying a sense of peace that seemed to wrap around him like a comforting blanket. Before him stretched an endless field bathed in golden light. It wasn't sunlight exactly, but something softer, gentler, yet more alive. The light seemed to hum, filling the space with a quiet, melodic resonance that made him feel safe. He looked around, noticing figures moving in the distance. They weren't like people he'd seen before. These beings radiated light, their forms glowing with an ethereal beauty. Though they didn't speak, Jake felt their presence in his heart, a deep love that he couldn't put into words. "Am I dreaming?" Jake wondered aloud. But no answer came. Instead, he felt drawn forward, as if the light itself was guiding him. Every step felt weightless, as though he wasn't walking but floating. Then, he saw someone standing ahead, someone familiar. His breath caught as he recognized the figure as father, Ethan. He looked different, vibrant, and whole, without any trace of pain or injury. Ethan smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "Dad?" Jake called out, running toward him. When they embraced, Jake felt a flood of emotions, joy, relief, and a sense of peace so profound that it brought tears to his eyes. "It's okay, Jake," Ethan said softly. "I am fine now. I am with him." Before Jake could ask what he meant, another figure emerged from the golden light. This one was different. He was dressed in a simple white robe, his face shining with kindness and wisdom. Jake didn't need an introduction, knew instantly who it was. "Jesus," he whispered. Jesus knelt down, meeting Jake's gaze. "You are not ready to stay here yet, Jake," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "Tea here is something you must do. You'll understand in time." Jake wanted to protest, to stay in this perfect place, but the light began to fade. A moment later, he felt himself being pulled back to the world he had left behind. Jake's body jolted on the hospital bed as the defibrillator delivered another shock. Around him, a flurry of voices rose and fell, doctors and nurses calling out commands, machines beeping erratically. Then, suddenly, his chest rose with a sharp intake of breath. "He's back," one of the nurses exclaimed. Jake's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. His small chest heaved as he gasped for air. Pain radiated through his body, a stark contrast to the peace he had just felt. His mother, Sarah, rushed to his bedside, tears streaming down her face as she clutched his hand. "Jake, sweetheart, I am here," she said, her voice trembling. "It's going to be okay." Jake's gaze shifted to her, but his expression wasn't one of confusion or fear. It was calm, almost serene. "Mom," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I saw Dad." Sarah froze, her heart pounding. What do you mean, honey?" she asked, leaning closer. Jake took a deep breath, his small frame trembling. "I saw him, Mom. He was in this bright place, so happy. He said he's okay, and he's with Jesus." The words hit Sarah like a tidal wave. She had avoided telling Jake about Ethan's death, unsure of how to break the news while he was recovering. Yet here he was, describing something she hadn't dared to mention. Her hands trembled as she stroked his hair. "It was so beautiful," Jake continued, his voice gaining strength. "There were angels, and the light was everywhere. It wasn't just light, it was love." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, her mind racing between disbelief and wonder. "Jake, are you sure? Maybe you were dreaming." Jake shook his head, his blue eyes locked onto hers. "It wasn't a dream, Mom. Jesus was there too. He told me it wasn't my time and I had to come back. He said I have something important to do." Sarah sat back in her chair, overwhelmed. "What did he mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know yet," Jake admitted, his small brow furrowed, but it felt real, like more real than this. The room fell silent, except for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Sarah struggled to process her son's words. Could this truly be what it seemed, a message from beyond? Or was it a child's mind grasping for meaning after trauma? Deep down, though, she felt something stir. Hope. Jake looked at her, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "Mom, I think I was sent back for a reason. We just have to figure out what it is." In the weeks following Jake's recovery, the Walker household buzzed with a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. Jake had returned to them, but he wasn't the same boy who had left that Sunday morning. He was quieter, more reflective, and he couldn't stop talking about what he had seen. "Mom, I have to tell people," Jake said one evening as they sat in the living room. His tone was serious, far beyond his 8 years. "Tell people what, sweetheart?" Sarah asked cautiously. "About what Jesus said, about how people need to change, how they need to stop being angry and selfish. If they don't, the darkness will spread." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. She wanted to protect Jake, to shield him from the weight of something so big. But she also saw the determination in his eyes, the same light that had always been there, now burning brighter. Word of Jake's experience began to spread among their friends and church community. At first, people were hesitant to believe, but those who listened closely couldn't ignore the sincerity in Jake's voice. He spoke with a calm assurance, describing the golden light, the angels, and the overwhelming peace he had felt, and then he told them about the darkness. "I saw it," Jake said one Sunday after church, standing in a circle of curious onlookers. It was like a storm, but it wasn't just rain or wind. It was bad. It made everything gray and cold. Jesus told me it would keep growing if people didn't choose love. The words hung in the air, leaving everyone silent. Some looked moved, others skeptical. Sarah stood by Jake's side, her heart torn between pride and fear. She knew the world wasn't always kind to those who spoke of things it couldn't understand. The turning point came when their pastor invited Jake to speak during a Sunday service. Standing before the congregation, Jake recounted his experience with a confidence that belied his age. Jesus said it's not too late, he told them. If we choose love, if we help each other and stop fighting, we can stop the darkness. The reaction was mixed. Some wept openly, touched by Jake's message. Others whispered among themselves, doubting the boy's words. But Jake didn't seem fazed. "I am just telling you what I saw," he said simply. Sarah knew this was only the beginning. Her son's story was spreading, and with it, a message of hope and warning. As Jake's story began to spread beyond their small church community, the reactions grew increasingly polarized. What started as quiet discussions among friends soon became a topic of heated debate in the wider town. Some embraced Jake's account wholeheartedly, calling it a sign from God. Others, however, were less kind. "This is just a child's imagination," a man declared during a church meeting one evening. "It's not uncommon for people to dream or hallucinate during trauma. Let's not turn this into something it's not." Sarah felt her hands clench into fists, but Jake remained calm. "I am not asking anyone to believe me," he said, his small voice carrying through the room. "I am just telling you what I saw. Jesus told me to share it, and that's what I am doing." But the criticism didn't stop there. Rumors began to circulate, with some accusing Sarah of fabricating the story to cope with her husband's death. Others speculated it was a ploy for attention. Sarah tried to shield Jake from these whispers, but she couldn't stop every cruel comment or skeptical glance. One day, a local journalist approached Sarah after church. "Mrs. Walker, would you and Jake be willing to do an interview?" she asked, her tone friendly but probing. "People are curious about what happened." Sarah hesitated, unsure if opening their lives further was the right decision, but Jake nodded. "If it helps more people hear what Jesus told me, I'll do it." The interview aired a week later, sparking an even bigger wave of reactions. Some viewers were moved by Jake's sincerity, calling his story inspiring. Others took to social media, accusing the Walkers of exploiting tragedy. The online criticism stung, but Jake stayed resolute. One night, Sarah found Jake sitting quietly in his room, staring out the window. "Does it bother you, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Jake turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "A little," he admitted, "but Jesus told me some people wouldn't listen. He said to keep trying anyway." Sarah knelt beside him, her heart swelling with pride and sadness. "You are so brave, Jake," she whispered. "I'll always be here to help you." Jake nodded, his resolve unshaken. "I just hope they understand before it's too late." Despite the doubts and challenges, Jake continued to share his message. For every skeptic, there was someone who found hope in his words, and for Jake, that was enough. Years passed, but Jake's story never faded. The Walker family became a symbol of resilience and faith, their lives intertwined with the extraordinary message Jake had carried back from the brink of death. Now a teenager, Jake continued to speak about his experience, his words touching people in ways he never imagined. Sarah watched her son with a mixture of awe and pride as he stood before a packed auditorium one evening. The room buzzed with anticipation. People had come from miles away to hear Jake share his story, some believers, some skeptics, but all curious. Jake stepped onto the stage, his calm demeanor belying his age. "I don't have all the answers," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I am just here to tell you what I saw and what Jesus told me." He recounted his journey to the golden field of light, his reunion with his father, and the overwhelming sense of peace he had felt. But, as always, he turned to the warning that had become the core of his mission. "Jesus showed me a world covered in darkness," he said. "He said that if we don't change, if we don't start choosing love, compassion, and kindness, the darkness will spread." The room was silent, his words sinking in. Jake's sincerity was undeniable, his message simple yet profound. "It's not too late," he continued. "We can still turn things around, but it starts with each of us how we treat our neighbors, how we forgive, how we love." After the event, people lingered to speak with Jake, many wiping away tears. Some shared their own struggles, seeking solace in his words. Others simply thanked him for reminding them of what truly mattered. For Sarah, the moments after these gatherings were bittersweet. She saw the weight her son carried, the responsibility of delivering a message that wasn't always welcomed. Yet, she also saw the light in his eyes, the quiet joy he felt in knowing he was making a difference. One night, as they drove home after another event, Sarah turned to Jake. "Do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" she asked softly. Jake thought for a moment, then shook his head. "I miss Dad every day," he said, "but I know he's at peace. And I know I was brought back for a reason." Through the trials and doubts, Jake had remained steadfast, a living testament to the power of love and hope. And in sharing his story, he became a beacon of light in a world yearning for both.